Welcome to Terms of Service. I'm CNN tech reporter Claire Duffy. This week, we are answering a question from one of our listeners. It's a question many people may be thinking about as electricity prices spike in areas where data centers are being built.
Hi, my name is Christine, and I live in Greenville, South Carolina, and Brooklyn, New York. With the rise in need for energy due to AI, I am wondering if I should be considering solar panels for my home. And if so, does it make more sense to rent them or to buy them? I'm a Tesla owner and I love the look of the Tesla panels, but I've heard that they are more expensive than other manufacturers. This also has an impact on financing for mortgages and the sale prices of homes. A lot of times appraisers do not give the full value of owned panels, and sometimes buyers don't think that they're worth whatever the owner has paid for them. I've heard that ultimately we are going to need nuclear power to power AI, so I'm wondering if I would be spending so much money and not really having an added value for it. Anyway, there are so many things to think about that I'm having decision-making paralysis, and I'm hoping you can help me.
To tackle this question, I'm joined today by Jan Rosenow. Jan is a professor of energy and climate policy at the University of Oxford, and he's been working around renewable energy, policy, and development for over 2 decades. Jan is based in the UK, where he says there aren't quite as many AI data centers yet as there are in the US, but the issue is still top of mind. My conversation with Jan Rosenow after this short break. Jan, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
So, Jan, first, the U.S. Department of Energy predicts that power demand from data centers could triple by 2028, potentially posing challenges for America's electrical grid. What do we know about how much AI is contributing to energy consumption, energy demand right now, and how does that compare with other industries?
Well, at the moment, it's a small slice of global energy demand. It's really not very much at all. And in terms of the increase that is expected over the next 4 or 5 years, the best resource for that is the International Energy Agency, which is sort of the global energy think tank that collects data on all of this. And what they predict is that about 8% of the additional electricity that we're going to need by 2030, that will be for data centers. The other 92% is for other things, industry electrification, electric vehicles, and heat pumps and things like that. And out of the 8%, not all of that is for AI. I mean, that's data centers, and only a fraction of that is for AI. So the vast majority would be for cloud computing, your Amazon shopping, or where you store your videos or your pictures, your email. So all of that is part of data centers, and AI is really only driving part of that increase in demand that we're expecting.
The 400 photos I take of my parents' dog.
Right.
When we talk about the AI data center piece, why is AI so energy hungry?
Well, it's a computing power that's sitting behind it. And at our fingertips, we can, within seconds now, generate images, even videos, do coding, create graphics. I mean, it's just phenomenal what AI can do from that perspective. But behind all of that sits a tremendous machinery of computing power that allows us to do that. And that needs a lot of electricity, and it needs to be cooled, all of that technology, because it generates a lot of waste heat. And if you don't cool it, you run into problems. So you have electricity to run the equipment, but then also to cool it. And that will create an increase in electricity and makes it particularly energy hungry. And I think we're going to see certainly more of that, given that all of us are using more and more AI, and businesses are using it more and more. So certainly not the end, but much more of the beginning of all of this.
Yeah. A lot of tech companies say that they're working to make AI more efficient, to reduce their energy demands. How realistic is that, and will it keep pace with the rate at which we're seeing new data centers be built?
We will see efficiency improvements, there's no doubt. I think the interesting question is also, how do we integrate data centers into the energy system that we already have? So what do I mean by that? I already talked about a lot of waste heat being generated. And some of that waste heat could be actually reused. So why not use it for heating homes, for example? So this is something that the Finnish cities have now worked out how to do. So there are several examples where in Finland data centers feed their waste heat into communal heating systems, into district heating systems that is being then used to replace heat from coal and gas. So that's one way of actually making sure data centers are running more efficiently and avoid some of the environmental impacts that they otherwise would result into. That is less common in the US because there's just not many communal heating systems in quite the same way. But some of them are being built. There are some examples of that also in the US. For example, Princeton University are building a very large district heating system. So this might come to the US as well.
How are we typically seeing data centers be powered? And is it possible to run them with renewable or more sustainable energy sources?
Yeah, absolutely. And data centers in many areas may actually be built in locations that are also very suitable for renewables. So they could be built close to, a big solar farm, for example. Think of a data center maybe in a desert, right, where you may have good solar potential, and therefore you can build the data center pretty close to the solar panels that are being built as well. And storage, large batteries. But of course, you could also imagine a situation where you just built new gas-fired power stations, which would not be a good idea in terms of carbon emissions and air pollution. And currently, we're seeing a bit of both. We're seeing a combination of technologies being deployed simply because of the speed at which they're being built. So there isn't yet a sort of standard that all new data centers will use renewables, but they can.
Understanding that AI is sort of a small slice of the overall growing demand for energy and electricity, is it still reasonable for people in areas where these new AI data centers are being built to have financial concerns about what that could mean for their electricity bills?
Absolutely. And that all depends on what the requirements are for data centers. Are they required to pay for their own grid connection? How are the costs being covered for the additional generation? What does this mean for other users of electricity? Because, of course, there might often be competition. So you may see that in the same area, maybe there's a new factory being built. They also want a grid connection. Or perhaps there's more electric vehicles being plugged in. And if that's not well coordinated, it could drive up the fees for the grid, and it could drive up electricity prices more generally. So certainly it's reasonable to have some concerns about rising electricity rates, especially in a situation where we already find, because of inflationary pressures and the geopolitical situation in the world, that prices are on the rise.
What determines how costly the electricity is in an area where a data center is being built? You mentioned some of those factors like, are they paying for their own grid connection? Does the grid need to get upgraded? If the big tech companies aren't covering that cost, that then gets distributed to those utility customers?
That's right. I mean, the utility would have to socialize those costs across the customer base, and that means rising rates for ratepayers, and those will be passed on to households as well, of course. That is not, I think, what I would expect to happen. Usually you would expect that if you build a data center, you also have to pay for the grid connection. The question is, the other costs associated with the data center operation, will those all be paid by the data center owner, or will some of those costs be passed on to consumers?
And we should say there are some tech companies, too, who have agreed voluntarily to cover some of these costs, like upgrading the grid, in part sort of addressing some of this backlash from communities. But I think your point is well taken that the proof will kind of be in the pudding in terms of whether they cover all of those costs or just some of them. So the idea for this episode came from a listener who called in and asked a question about whether she should invest in solar panels for her homes to offset some of these rising electricity costs. Do you think that solar is something that everyday homeowners should start to think about as we go through this transition?
100%. And even in cloudy UK, where I live in Oxford, solar panels do pay back within a few years now. It used to take at least a decade, maybe quite a bit longer actually, but now it's less than 10 years. And after that, basically the electricity you're getting is free, because you've paid back for the initial upfront investment of your panels, and after that you have that free electricity. That's not going to cover all of your needs, of course, especially in winter. There's not that much solar, and therefore you're going to use more from the grid. But it definitely makes sense if you have space on your roof or anywhere really where you can put them. It's worth considering because the economics have really changed fundamentally. I mean, I started work in energy 20 years ago, and solar was just so expensive. It didn't stack up in terms of a business case. It's a no-brainer now, and that's why we're seeing a lot of people, even in countries that are actually pretty poor, like Pakistan, record adoption rates of solar. So it definitely makes sense for people to look at that.
The listener who sent us this question says that she's a Tesla owner. Is there any reason why electric vehicle owners might be especially interested in buying solar panels?
Yeah, 100%. Because if you can charge your car with the electricity from the solar panels, you don't have to buy it from the grid. I mean, it's as simple as that. And therefore, you're saving money. And you can schedule. It's quite easy now with an app. You can schedule when your car is getting charged. You can make sure it's using the electricity from your panels. And therefore, it does make an awful lot of sense. And what we're often seeing is people buy an electric car first. Then they may be considering solar because they then realize, actually, it's cheaper for me to get that from my solar panels. And the next step might be that they buy a heat pump and replace their gas furnace. So there's sort of EVs are often the sort of gateway drug, if you will, for other steps in the house. But solar in combination with electric vehicles makes a lot of sense.
When we come back, Jan dives into the practical considerations for homeowners thinking about solar panels, including costs. I'll also ask him what this trend could mean even for non-homeowners like me, who are nonetheless concerned about AI's impact on the environment. That's after the break. How much does it cost? I mean, if you look at sort of a regular residential home, what kinds of upfront costs are you looking at to install solar?
I mean, in the US, traditionally, the installation of solar is the cost is higher compared to Europe. I think most of that is actually not the equipment cost, but it's labor. It's it's a softer aspects of that, the sort of regulatory conditions in which solar is being installed in the US. It just makes it more expensive. But to give you, I mean, it's hard to give you an exact number, but we're not talking tens of thousands. It's a few $1,000s, depending on the size of the installation. You can get very, very low cost solar panels these days. And even if you have limited space, you can put a small solar panel there for a relatively modest amount of money, maybe $2,000, $3,000. That's not going to cover all of your electricity needs, but it certainly will help bring down your bills.
And when you think about solar panels paying off, you said, 7-ish years. Does it only make sense if you plan to stay in your home for those 7 years, or do solar panels also potentially increase the value of your home if you end up looking to sell?
Yeah, of course. I mean, increasingly people will pay attention to those aspects. And there is evidence that suggests, if you have solar panels or if your home is better insulated, if you have a heat pump that's more efficient than a gas furnace, you see an uplift in the value of the home. So there is definitely evidence that suggests that it adds value to the home. And therefore, even if you move earlier, it does make sense for you to make that investment.
So this listener, Christine, said that part of her thinking about solar panels was financial, but she was also wondering if it could serve as a contingency if, for example, there were brownouts during the summer from the grid being overtaxed. First of all, I wonder if that is a growing risk, again, because AI data centers put such a strain on the grid. And could solar panels serve as a solution in those instances?
Definitely. I mean, if you have solar and perhaps even a battery and a small home battery coupled with solar, yes, you would be able to then use that electricity during a brownout or even a blackout, indeed. And that's why I mentioned Pakistan before. That was a key driver because the grid was so unreliable, or is still so unreliable, and people just wanted to make sure they had access to electricity when they needed it. So the combination of solar with a battery in particular gives you that baseline of electricity you need. Of course, that depends on how much you use and whether it's wintertime or summertime. But broadly speaking, yes, it can shield you from that. And the second question, Claire, you asked about can data centers lead to more grid instability and maybe lead to brownouts. That's rather unlikely. And why is that? Well, the vast majority of outages actually have not much to do with there's too much demand or not enough generation, but have to do with the electricity grid. It's quite simple things. It's often trees falling on wires and the transmission wires not operating anymore. And that's where a lot of the faults actually lie in the electricity system. It's very rare that there's not enough generation on the system. I mean, it can happen. There have been instances, I think in New York, this goes back quite some time, but there were blackouts because of very high demand for air conditioning during a very hot summer. So these things do happen, and sometimes you have substations that can't cope with the electricity demand, but it's usually further upstream in the network rather than because you have a heavy user on the electricity system. And of course, the utilities plan for this. They will know exactly what the demand forecast will be for that user and be carefully planning the system around that.
Stepping back a bit, there are concerns that this AI data center build out is taking us potentially backwards on global climate goals, slowing our progress toward net zero energy consumption at a time when, we really need to be speeding up. Does that worry you?
It does worry me when I hear that we should just build data centers at any cost and ignore where the energy comes from. And of course, you could serve the needs of data center for energy with clean power. That's not a problem. We have the technologies now. But I've also seen signs of, some people arguing, let's just build a lot of gas-fired power stations because that's quick and easy, and why don't we just do that? And we have to be careful, of course, because we're then locking in new generation capacity, and we just seen what happened with international gas markets and how volatile those are. And of course, we still have a climate problem to solve, and therefore, that is something I would be quite concerned about. I think actually having an obligation to invest or build solar batteries or other clean energy technologies alongside a data center, to me, seems to be quite a sensible way forward, because you're then making sure that those who want to build data centers actually make sure they have the electricity that they need from clean sources.
Obviously, there's only so much that any of us can do as individuals when we think about this big climate problem. And when you have these big corporations perhaps deciding to use gas power to move quickly to build out these data centers. But I also know that many people want to do what they can. Can switching to solar on your home sort of make a small dent in this problem?
It can. And when you look at one individual decision, of course, you can't really see that it's just noise. But once you aggregate millions of people's choices, you suddenly see a massive change in the energy system and can make a big dent. So it's all a question of perspective. Are you looking just at your local community, or are you looking at this globally? And I would say it definitely makes a difference, because if everybody decides to do the right thing, then we will have a lower cost, cleaner electricity system, which is good for everybody.
Thinking about our listener, Christine, I'm wondering what your sort of advice would be for her as she does this consideration. And are there other potential downsides aside from obviously the upfront cost?
I can't think of many downsides. There's no sort of risks from having solar panels installed. It really is mainly a financial consideration. Of course, there will be a little bit of disruption, but the installation is pretty simple. I mean, in my case, it took a day and a half, and the solar panels were fully installed, plugged in, and were generating electricity. So a day and a half, that wasn't too bad. And most of that happens outside of your house. And of course, an electrician will at some point have to come in and look at your electricity connection. But it's not something that is hugely disruptive. But it's just something to factor in, of course, when you have these kinds of technologies installed. But beyond that, I would always recommend getting at least 3 quotes from different suppliers. really make sure that there's sound financial analysis behind it. How long will it take for the panels to pay back? And once that's been done, I think you have a good sense of what will it cost, and also which supplier might be well suited. Of course, always good to go with someone who has a track record of delivering high quality installations with high customer satisfaction. There are unfortunately always companies that will try to make money very quickly by not paying too much attention to customers' needs. So avoiding those companies is always important.
Do you think that governments should be doing more to subsidize, make it easier for people to make these kinds of investments?
I mean, we just had a major push in the UK for this with significant subsidies, especially for low-income households. I mean, for wealthy households, I think really because the technology now pays back so quickly, there's not a need for big subsidies, but especially I think for poorer households, I mean, my view is that it does make sense to help them, have access to clean electricity that's low cost. And in a way, it's a sort of combination of social and energy policy. And it does make sense. There's always, of course, a question, how big the subsidies should be. And also, if we over subsidize, there's a risk that we have much higher cost in the supply chain, because then installers would start charging a little bit more. So having some sort of downward trajectory overall where you bring down those subsidy costs is also important. But certainly in the short to medium term, for lower income households, I think it is definitely a good idea to provide some financial support.
Well, Jan, thank you so much. We really appreciate you doing this. This has been such a fascinating but also really practically helpful episode, I think. So thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
For many of us, rising energy costs feel like an unavoidable reality. But there may be real ways to reduce that cost burden. For everyday homeowners, installing solar panels can make a big difference, and they're getting more affordable. Once they're installed, Jan says the panels pay for themselves within a few years. They can provide you peace of mind in the case of brownouts or blackouts, and they could even raise the value of your home. Still, it's worth noting that when it comes to addressing the major energy demands of AI data centers, most of the responsibility lies with the big tech companies building them to invest in local energy grids and renewable energy sources. Local governments may also have some sway in requiring these kinds of investments from prospective data center builders. Thanks again to Christine for writing in. We would love to hear more of your questions. If you have a question about the tech showing up in your life, please send us an email or voice note to cnntermsofservice@gmail.com. That's it for this week's episode of Terms of Service. I'm Claire Duffy. Catch you next week.